London, 1814. Miss Clara Brennington found herself, for the third time that evening, hiding behind the same potted palm. The Countess of Merryweather's annual spring ball was in full splendor, with crystal chandeliers casting golden light upon the cream of society. Yet Clara remained in the shadows, observing rather than participating, a habit her aunt had labeled distressingly contemplative for a woman of marriageable age. The truth was simpler: Clara had no intention of dancing with any gentleman present. At 23, she had witnessed too many of her friends surrender their independence to husbands who viewed wives as ornamental possessions. The marriage market was precisely that, a market where women were appraised like horseflesh and valued according to their dowries and connections. "You cannot hide forever, my dear," came her Aunt Agatha's voice, cutting through Clara's thoughts. "Lord Penworth has asked after you twice." Clara suppressed a sigh. "Lord Penworth is 60 if he's a day, and I observed him sleeping through Lady Harrington's pianoforte performance." "He owns half of Yorkshire," Aunt Agatha countered, adjusting her turbaned headdress with its absurdly large ostrich feather. "And you, my dear, own nothing but your father's good name and a modest dowry that shrinks with every passing season." "Then I shall become a governess," Clara said, though the prospect filled her with dread. "Or perhaps I shall write Gothic novels under a pen name." Aunt Agatha's face contorted as though Clara had suggested she might take up street sweeping. "Your father entrusted me with ensuring you make a suitable match. 3 seasons have passed, Clara. Your bloom fades. Perhaps I prefer to wither on the vine than be plucked by unworthy hands," Clara replied, immediately regretting her sharpness when her aunt's expression hardened. "You will dance with Lord Penworth," Aunt Agatha pronounced, the ostrich feather quivering with finality. "And then with Sir Thomas Eldridge. His gout prevents excessive movement, so you needn't exert yourself." Before Clara could protest further, a commotion near the entrance hall captured everyone's attention. Conversations dimmed then surged again with renewed vigor. Even the musicians faltered momentarily. "Goodness," Aunt Agatha whispered, forgetting her matrimonial mission entirely. "It's the Duke of Zephyrcrest." Clara peered around the palm fronds. A tall gentleman stood in the entryway, his bearing so rigid he might have been carved from marble. Even from a distance, she could see his expression was equally stony. Despite his evident reluctance to be present, the crowd seemed magnetically drawn to him, creating an orbit of deference. "Quentin Zephyrcrest," Aunt Agatha continued in hushed tones, seemingly forgetting Clara's transgressions. "They call him the Frost Duke. Hasn't attended a social function in 3 years, not since his fiancée died." Clara supplied. "Worse. Eloped with his cousin," Aunt Agatha corrected. "On the very eve of their wedding. The scandal would have destroyed a lesser man. Instead, he simply withdrew. They say his heart calcified that night. He speaks to no one beyond what propriety demands." Clara observed the Duke as he performed perfunctory bows to the host and hostess. Though impeccably dressed in evening black, there was something almost predatory about his movements, a wolf reluctantly donning gentleman's clothing. "Then why has he emerged now?" Clara asked. "He must finally be seeking a wife," Aunt Agatha's eyes gleamed with calculation. "Duty to the dukedom, of course. An heir is required, regardless of one's personal disappointments." Clara felt a twinge of unexpected sympathy for the Duke. How terribly cold-blooded. To seek a wife merely as a breeding mare. "Don't be vulgar, Clara," her aunt chided. "It's the natural order. And with his fortune, any young lady should count herself blessed to be considered." Clara watched as society matrons began subtly, and in some cases, not so subtly, maneuvering their daughters into the Duke's vicinity. The young ladies themselves appeared torn between terror and excitement at the prospect of catching the eye of such a formidable figure. "I find nothing blessed about being valued solely for one's ability to produce heirs," Clara remarked. Aunt Agatha looked as though she might deliver another lecture on female duty, but was distracted by the approach of Lord Penworth, who had evidently roused himself from his slumber. "Miss Brennington," he wheezed, bowing over Clara's reluctantly offered hand. "Might I have the honor of this dance?" Before Clara could formulate a polite refusal, her aunt answered for her. "She would be delighted, my lord." As Clara was led to the dance floor, she glanced back at the Duke. For the briefest moment, their eyes met across the crowded room. Something in his gaze, a flash of recognition, perhaps, startled her. Not recognition of her person, for they had never been introduced, but recognition of something deeper, the trapped feeling of a creature performing social duties against its nature. Then he looked away, and Clara was left wondering if she had imagined the entire exchange. The Duke of Zephyrcrest had not wanted to attend the Countess of Merryweather's ball. Indeed, he had not wanted to attend any social function since that fateful night 3 years prior, when he had discovered his fiancée in the arms of his cousin. The betrayal had been complete, not merely of his heart, but of his trust in human nature itself. Yet here he stood, observing the marriage mart with detached contempt. His solicitor and his aunt had finally worn him down with their incessant reminders of duty. The dukedom required an heir. His personal feelings on the matter were irrelevant. "Your Grace," Lady Merryweather simpered, "how utterly delightful that you've honored us with your presence. There are so many charming young ladies eager to make your acquaintance." "I doubt that very much," he replied coolly. "Their mammas may be eager, but the young ladies themselves would be wiser to keep their distance." Lady Merryweather tittered nervously. "Such modesty, your Grace!" "Why, any young lady would be fortunate to align herself with a man known throughout society for his coldness." "I think not." He softened his tone marginally, aware that his hostess didn't deserve his acerbity. "Nevertheless, I appreciate your hospitality, Lady Merryweather." As she drifted away to attend to other guests, Quentin scanned the room, already regretting his decision to emerge from seclusion. The calculated glances, the whispers behind fans, it was all precisely as he remembered. A theatrical performance where everyone recited lines they had neither written nor believed. His attention was caught by a young woman being led onto the dance floor by Lord Penworth. Unlike the other débutantes, who projected an air of careful delight, her expression was one of barely concealed resignation. When their eyes momentarily met, Quentin experienced an unsettling sensation of recognition. He watched her dance with mechanical precision, her smile never reaching her eyes. When Lord Penworth spoke, she nodded at appropriate intervals, but her gaze occasionally drifted toward the windows as though calculating the distance to freedom. Quentin found himself moving along the perimeter of the ballroom, observing her subsequent dance with Sir Thomas Eldridge, who appeared to be in considerable pain from his gout. Throughout this ordeal, the young woman maintained her composure, even as her elderly partner trod upon her toes repeatedly. When the dance concluded, she curtsied politely, then made her way toward the terrace doors. Quentin, acting on an impulse he couldn't quite name, followed at a discreet distance. The terrace was mercifully empty, the spring night cool enough to deter most guests from venturing outdoors. The young woman moved to the balustrade, removed her gloves, and pressed her palms against the cool stone as though drawing strength from its solidity. "Are you escaping or merely pausing before the next assault?" Quentin asked before he could reconsider the impropriety of addressing her without introduction. She turned, startled but not frightened. "Your Grace," she acknowledged with a small curtsy. "I hadn't realized I was being observed." "Forgive me," he said, though he wasn't entirely sorry. "I recognized a fellow fugitive." Her lips curved slightly. Is that what we are? I thought I was merely taking air between dances. Did it? She tilted her head. How unfortunate. I've been repeatedly instructed that a lady should maintain an appearance of serene delight, regardless of whether her partner converses exclusively about his gout or his horses. Both deadly topics, Quentin agreed, surprising himself with the ease of their exchange. You have the advantage of me, Miss Brennington. Clara Brennington. Miss Brennington. I am the Duke of Zephyrcrest, she supplied. Everyone knows who you are, Your Grace. And what do they know of me? He asked, finding himself genuinely curious about her answer. She studied him thoughtfully. They say you're the most feared duke in England. That your heart is encased in ice. That you speak only when absolutely necessary, and never pleasantly. All true, he confirmed. Is it? She turned back to face the darkened gardens. Then I must be imagining this relatively pleasant conversation. Despite himself, Quentin felt the corner of his mouth twitch. Perhaps you're conversing with an apparition. That would explain it, she nodded solemnly. Though I believe ghosts are generally colder than the living, and yet you seem to be generating a remarkable amount of warmth for a man supposedly encased in ice. Her boldness should have offended him. Instead, he found himself taking a step closer. Miss Brennington, has anyone ever suggested you speak too frankly for a young lady? Frequently, she admitted. But as I have no intention of securing a husband, I see little reason to dissemble. This statement, delivered with such calm certainty, genuinely surprised him. No intention? Then you're either independently wealthy or planning to enter a convent. Neither. I simply refuse to barter my freedom for financial security. A noble sentiment, he observed, but an impractical one in a world where women have few options beyond marriage. Says the man who has avoided matrimony despite having every advantage of fortune and title, she countered. I was engaged once, he said, the words emerging before he could stop them. It ended poorly. Her expression softened. Yes, I've heard the whispers. I'm sorry for your disappointment. It wasn't disappointment, he corrected, his voice hardening. It was confirmation of what I always suspected, that love is a convenient fiction, a temporary madness that invariably leads to betrayal. How comforting that must be, she said, surprising him again. Comforting. To have such certainty. To know unequivocally that love is impossible. Her eyes, which he now noticed were an unusual shade of amber, held his steadily. It must simplify one's decisions enormously. Before he could respond, the terrace doors opened, flooding the space with light and the sound of music. A matron with an elaborate turban peered out, her expression shifting from concern to calculation when she spotted Clara with the Duke. Clara, darling! I've been looking everywhere for you, she trilled, advancing with remarkable speed for a woman of her years. Your Grace, what an unexpected pleasure. I am Mrs. Agatha Brennington, Clara's aunt and guardian. I see you've already made the acquaintance of my niece. We were discussing the weather, Clara said smoothly. His Grace was kind enough to warn me about the evening chill. Indeed, Quentin confirmed, noting with interest how quickly Miss Brennington had constructed a plausible explanation for their unchaperoned conversation. But as you've observed, Mrs. Brennington, the night air grows cool. Perhaps Miss Brennington would be more comfortable inside. Certainly, the aunt agreed eagerly. Clara, Lord Fairfax has been asking after you for the cotillion. Clara's momentary grimace was visible only to Quentin. How thoughtful of him, she murmured. Then, with perfect composure, she curtsied to the Duke. Thank you for your concern regarding the weather, Your Grace. As she moved toward the doors, Quentin found himself saying, "Miss Brennington." She paused, turning back with a questioning look. "I believe Lady Merriweather mentioned something about a literary discussion in her library tomorrow afternoon. Perhaps you'll be in attendance." Understanding flickered in her eyes. "I'm exceedingly fond of libraries, Your Grace." With that, she allowed her aunt to usher her back into the ballroom, leaving Quentin to wonder what madness had possessed him to arrange another meeting. He had come to London to find a biddable, unremarkable wife who would make minimal demands upon his emotions. Clara Brennington was many things, but unremarkable and biddable were not among them. Yet as he returned to the ballroom, his eyes instinctively sought her among the dancers. For the first time in 3 years, Quentin felt something stir within him, not love, certainly, for he would never be so foolish again, but curiosity. A dangerous sentiment, perhaps, but preferable to the numbness that had been his constant companion. A literary discussion? Aunt Agatha practically vibrated with excitement as their carriage rolled toward Lady Merriweather's townhouse the following afternoon. "And the Duke specifically mentioned you would be there?" "My dear, this is beyond my wildest hopes." Clara adjusted her bonnet, uncomfortable with her aunt's transparent glee. "It's merely a discussion of books, Aunt. Not a proposal of marriage." Of course," her aunt agreed, though her expression remained triumphant. "But for the Duke of Zephyrcrest to single you out in any capacity is remarkable. The man speaks to practically no one." "He spoke to me," Clara said, recalling their conversation with a mixture of confusion and interest. "Quite normally, in fact." "Well, naturally he would," Aunt Agatha preened. "Your father may have left you with modest means, but your lineage is impeccable. And while I've despaired of your conversational habits, perhaps the Duke appreciates a woman who speaks her mind." Clara doubted this. More likely, he had been temporarily diverted by her unconventional attitudes, like a naturalist encountering an unusual species of butterfly. Once the novelty wore off, he would resume his search for a proper duchess. The thought shouldn't have disappointed her. Lady Merriweather's library was a handsome room lined with leather-bound volumes that, judging by their pristine condition, had been selected for their appearance rather than their content. A dozen or so guests were already present when Clara and her aunt arrived, clustered in small conversational groups. The Duke was not among them. "Lady Merriweather," Aunt Agatha gushed, "how kind of you to include us in your literary salon." The Countess, a plump woman with an addiction to lace, beamed. "Mrs. Brennington, Miss Brennington, welcome. We're discussing the latest novel by the author of Sense and Sensibility, anonymously published, of course, but everyone knows it's a woman's hand." Clara, whose copy of Pride and Prejudice was worn from repeated reading, brightened. "A worthy topic indeed. I found Mr. Darcy's transformation particularly well rendered." Transformation? The question came from behind her. Clara turned to find the Duke of Zephyrcrest standing in the doorway, his tall figure silhouetted against the afternoon light. "I confess I found the character rather consistent throughout, proud and disagreeable from beginning to end." "Then you missed the point of the novel entirely, Your Grace," Clara replied before she could stop herself. Her aunt made a small, distressed sound beside her. Rather than taking offense, the Duke's mouth quirked slightly as he entered the room. "Did I? Perhaps you'll enlighten me, Miss Brennington." Clara was aware of the other guests watching their exchange with undisguised interest. "Mr. Darcy's fundamental nature doesn't change," she explained, warming to the topic. "What changes is his understanding of himself and others. He learns that his pride has blinded him to his own faults and to the worth of those he considered beneath him. A convenient epiphany that happens to coincide with his romantic inclinations," the Duke observed, moving to stand before the fireplace. "Not at all," Clara countered. His attachment to Elizabeth forms despite his initial determination to find her unsuitable. It's the force of her character, her unwillingness to be cowed by his rank or wealth, that compels him to reconsider his prejudices. You seem to have given this considerable thought, he noted. I believe good literature reveals truths about human nature, Clara said, including the capacity for growth and change, even in those who seem most rigid in their convictions. Something flickered in the Duke's eyes, a challenge, perhaps, or recognition. An optimistic view, Miss Brennington. Not all people are capable of such transformation. Everyone is capable, she insisted. Though not all are willing. The tension in their exchange was broken by Lady Merriweather, who clapped her hands delightedly. What a spirited discussion! Your Grace, Miss Brennington, you must both try the lemon cakes. They're particularly fine today. As the conversation fractured into smaller groups, Clara found herself guided toward the refreshment table by her aunt, who whispered urgently, "You must not contradict the Duke so directly, Clara. Men of his standing expect deference, not debate." Then he should not have raised the topic, Clara whispered back, though she did wonder if she had overstepped. The Duke's expression had been unreadable. She was surprised when, a few minutes later, he approached them directly. "Miss Brennington, I wonder if I might continue our literary discussion," he asked, with a courteous nod to Aunt Agatha. "With your aunt's permission, of course." Aunt Agatha nearly swooned with pleasure. "Certainly, Your Grace. Clara adores books, reads far too many of them, in my opinion. I shall just be over there." She gestured vaguely toward a group of matrons who were watching the proceedings with poorly concealed interest. Once they were relatively alone, the Duke said, "You have strong opinions about fictional characters." "I have strong opinions about most things," Clara admitted. "It's a failing, according to my aunt." "Is it?" He considered her thoughtfully. "I find it unexpected, but not displeasing." Clara felt a flush rising to her cheeks. "You invited me here to discuss literature." "I invited you here because you're the first person in 3 years who has spoken to me as though I'm a man rather than a title," he said, his directness surprising them both. Clara hardly knew how to respond to such honesty. "Perhaps that's because I have no interest in your title, Your Grace." "Quentin," he said quietly. "When we're speaking privately, I would prefer you use my given name." "That would be highly improper," she pointed out. "As was our unchaperoned conversation on the terrace," he countered. "Yet here we are." Clara studied him, trying to reconcile the forbidding figure of reputation with the man before her, whose eyes held a warmth at odds with his austere demeanor. "Very well, Quentin. Though only when we're relatively alone." "Thank you." He gestured toward a window seat partially screened by a large potted fern. "Shall we continue our discussion of Mr. Darcy's transformation?" They spent the next half-hour in animated conversation that ranged from literature to philosophy to the peculiarities of London society. Clara found herself laughing more than once at his dry observations, while he seemed genuinely interested in her perspectives. "You're unlike anyone I've met," he said finally, during a momentary lull. "You speak your mind without calculation." "Another failing," she said lightly. "I'm told a lady should be mysterious and alluring, revealing her thoughts only in carefully measured doses." "Who told you that nonsense?" "My aunt, finishing school governesses, every conduct book ever written for young ladies," Clara enumerated. "The entire structure of society, really. And yet you disregard these instructions." She sighed. "Not intentionally. I simply find it exhausting to constantly monitor my words for acceptability. And since I've no intention of marrying, there seems little point in practicing deception." "You mentioned that before," he said, his expression growing serious. This determination to remain unwed. May I ask why? Clara hesitated, then decided honesty was best. I value my independence too highly to surrender it, even for financial security. I've observed too many marriages where affection, if it existed at all, quickly gave way to indifference or resentment. The husband becomes a tyrant, the wife a possession. I want no part of such an arrangement. And if it were a different arrangement, he asked quietly. If independence were respected rather than curtailed. Clara felt a flutter of something dangerous in her chest. Such marriages are rare exceptions. Perhaps, he acknowledged. But they exist. Before she could respond, Aunt Agatha materialized beside them, her expression a mixture of delight and anxiety. Clara, dear, we really must be going. We're expected at the Harringtons for dinner. Of course, Clara rose, suddenly aware of how long they had been conversing. The library had emptied considerably, and those who remained were watching them with undisguised curiosity. Miss Brennington, the Duke said formally, standing as well, it has been a pleasure discussing literature with you. Perhaps we might continue our conversation at Lady Pembroke's musical evening tomorrow. Aunt Agatha answered before Clara could. We would be delighted, Your Grace. Clara is particularly fond of music, aren't you, dear? I enjoy certain compositions, Clara said carefully, though in truth, she found most musical evenings tedious in the extreme. Until tomorrow, then, the Duke said, bowing over her hand. His fingers pressed something into her palm, a folded piece of paper that she quickly concealed in her glove. It was not until she was in the privacy of her bedchamber that evening that Clara read his note, the Harrington dinner will surely be interminable. Take comfort in knowing that I shall be equally miserable at Lord Wexley's card party. Perhaps thoughts of our literary debate will sustain us both through these ordeals. Until tomorrow. Clara pressed the note to her heart, surprised by the warmth that spread through her. This was dangerous territory indeed. Over the next fortnight, Quentin found himself attending more social functions than he had in the previous 3 years combined. At each one, he sought out Clara Brennington, their conversations becoming the only moments of genuine pleasure in his otherwise dutiful participation in the season. They debated books, art, and politics. They exchanged observations about the absurdities of high society. They discovered shared interests in architecture and natural philosophy. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, Quentin found the ice around his heart beginning to thaw. The notion terrified him. You're developing feelings for her, his cousin, Lord Richard Hammett, observed as they rode through Hyde Park one morning. Richard was the one relative Quentin still trusted, having been abroad during the scandal with his former fiancée. Nonsense, Quentin replied automatically. Miss Brennington is merely intelligent conversation in a desert of inanity. Of course, Richard agreed, too readily. That's why you've attended 17 social events in 14 days, purely for the stimulating conversation. Quentin scowled. I'm here to find a suitable duchess, as everyone has been reminding me for years. Miss Brennington has made it abundantly clear she has no interest in marriage. Has she? Richard looked skeptical. Or has she merely stated an opposition to the kind of marriage she's observed, one where women are treated as property rather than partners? This observation was uncomfortably close to certain conversations Quentin had shared with Clara. It makes no difference, he said firmly. I will never love again. The dukedom requires an heir, not a love match. Then why Miss Brennington? Richard pressed. There are dozens of eligible young ladies whose families would be delighted by an alliance with Zephyrcrest. Yet you spend every social function seeking out the one woman who claims to want no husband. She's refreshing, Quentin admitted grudgingly. She's bewitched you, Richard corrected. And I, for one, couldn't be more pleased. The Frost Duke, finally thawing. Your metaphors need work, Quentin muttered, but he couldn't entirely dismiss his cousin's observations. Something had changed within him these past weeks. The world seemed somehow more vivid in Clara's presence, as though she had adjusted the lens through which he viewed it. That evening, at Lady Pembroke's musical soiree, Quentin found himself searching the crowd for Clara with greater urgency than usual. When he finally spotted her, she was engaged in conversation with Lord Thornfield, a wealthy baron known for his literary interests. Something hot and unfamiliar twisted in Quentin's chest as he observed their animated exchange. Clara was laughing at something Thornfield had said, her eyes bright with genuine amusement. The baron leaned closer, clearly captivated. Quentin moved through the crowd with purpose, positioning himself within earshot of their conversation. Truly, Miss Brennington, your insights into Wordsworth's poetry are remarkable, Thornfield was saying. I would very much like to continue our discussion. Perhaps you might consider driving with me tomorrow in the park. Before Clara could respond, Quentin stepped forward. Miss Brennington, good evening. Both Clara and Thornfield looked up, startled by his abrupt arrival. Clara recovered first. Your Grace, she said with a small curtsy, though he detected a note of uncertainty in her voice. Lord Thornfield and I were discussing the late poets. Indeed, Quentin said coolly. Forgive my interruption, but I believe Miss Brennington promised to introduce me to her aunt. There was a matter regarding tomorrow's garden party at Zephyrcrest House that I wish to discuss. Clara's eyes widened slightly. There was no garden party planned, but she played along smoothly. Of course, Your Grace. Lord Thornfield, if you'll excuse me. The Baron bowed, clearly disappointed but unwilling to challenge a duke. Certainly. Perhaps another time, Miss Brennington. As they moved away, Clara murmured, a garden party at Zephyrcrest House. This is the first I've heard of it. A necessary fiction, Quentin said, guiding her toward a relatively quiet alcove. Thornfield was monopolizing you. Clara raised an eyebrow. Was he? I thought we were having a perfectly civil conversation about poetry. He was about to invite you driving. Yes, I gathered that, she said, amusement creeping into her expression. Does that concern you, Your Grace? The formal address stung. We agreed you would call me Quentin. When we're alone, she corrected. We're hardly alone here. He glanced around at the crowded drawing room. True enough. Would you care to walk in the garden? Lady Pembroke has illuminated the paths with lanterns for the evening. With my aunt as chaperone, perhaps, Clara suggested. Quentin frowned. Your aunt appears to be deeply engaged in conversation with Lady Harrington. I doubt she would wish to be disturbed. Then we must remain here, Clara said firmly, though her eyes held a hint of regret. Propriety must be observed, especially given the frequency of our conversations. People are beginning to talk. Let them, Quentin said, with more vehemence than he had intended. I care nothing for gossip. But I do, Clara replied softly. My reputation is my only real possession. Her words sobered him. Forgive me. I wouldn't wish to compromise you in any way. He hesitated, then added, though I must confess, I find the prospect of you driving out with Thornfield displeasing. Do you? Clara studied him with those perceptive amber eyes. And why is that? Because? Quentin faltered, unused to articulating emotions he had long suppressed. Because I have come to value our conversations. I would not wish to see them usurped by another. I see. Clara's expression was unreadable. And these conversations, are they merely an intellectual diversion for you? A respite from the tedium of the season? They are the reason I continue to attend these functions, he admitted. The only reason. Something flickered in her eyes, hope, perhaps, or caution. Quentin, she said, dropping her voice so that only he could hear, what are we doing? Conversing, he answered, though he knew that wasn't what she meant. No, she shook her head. These past weeks. The notes, the conversations, the way you just intervened with Lord Thornfield. What does it signify? Quentin found himself at a crossroads. The truth was that he didn't know precisely what they were doing. He only knew that the thought of not seeing Clara, of not hearing her laugh or watching her eyes flash with conviction as she argued a point, had become increasingly intolerable. I don't know, he said finally, choosing honesty over pretense. I know only that I find myself thinking of you when we're apart. That I look for you the moment I enter any room. That the prospect of you forming an attachment to someone else is. He stopped, unable to find the right word. Unwelcome, she suggested. Unbearable, he corrected. Clara drew a sharp breath. Quentin, whatever she might have said was interrupted by the arrival of her aunt, who approached with an expression of barely contained excitement. Your Grace! How delightful to find you with my niece again. I've just been hearing the most intriguing rumors about a garden party at Zephyrcrest House tomorrow. Quentin, gathering his composure, inclined his head. Indeed, Mrs. Brennington. A small gathering for a select few acquaintances. I was just extending an invitation to you and Miss Brennington. How wonderfully kind. Aunt Agatha practically glowed with satisfaction. We would be honored, wouldn't we, Clara? Clara, who had managed to school her features into a polite mask, nodded. Most kind, Your Grace. Excellent, Quentin said, realizing he was now committed to hosting an event he had invented moments ago. Shall we say 2 o'clock? The rose garden should be particularly fine. As he took his leave shortly thereafter, Quentin found himself in the unprecedented position of having to organize a garden party overnight. Yet the prospect didn't dismay him as it once might have. The thought of seeing Clara in his home, of showing her the gardens he had personally redesigned during his period of seclusion, filled him with an anticipation he had not experienced in years. It was only later, as he lay awake in his bedchamber, that the full implications of his actions struck him. He had effectively declared himself to Clara Brennington, a woman who had repeatedly stated her opposition to marriage. And while he had not spoken of love, would never speak of love again, he had admitted to feelings that went far beyond mere friendship or intellectual compatibility. The question that kept him from sleep was simple: what did Clara feel for him? And if, by some miracle, her feelings matched his own, what then? She wanted no husband, he needed a wife, but had vowed never to love again. It seemed an impossible impasse. Yet as dawn broke, Quentin found himself issuing instructions for the hasty arrangement of a garden party that, 12 hours earlier, had not existed even in thought. Whatever the outcome, he knew with sudden clarity that his life had irrevocably changed the night he had followed a spirited young woman onto a moonlit terrace. Clara stood before her wardrobe in a state of uncharacteristic indecision. The blue muslin or the green-sprigged lawn, she asked her lady's maid for the 3rd time. The blue brings out your eyes, miss, Martha replied patiently. Though his grace seems to find you pleasing regardless of what you wear. Clara flushed. His grace is merely being courteous. Martha, who had been in Clara's service since childhood and thus took certain liberties, raised an eyebrow. Is that why he invented a garden party on the spot when Lord Thornfield was showing interest? Out of courtesy. You shouldn't listen to gossip, Clara chided, though the memory of Quentin's intervention still sent a thrill through her. Unbearable, he had called the thought of her with someone else. The word had reverberated through her dreams all night. "It's not gossip when I hear it straight from your aunt," Martha countered, deftly arranging Clara's hair into an elegant style adorned with small blue ribbons. "She's already planning the wedding breakfast." "There will be no wedding," Clara said firmly, though with less conviction than she might have a month ago. "The Duke has made his views on love quite clear." Martha's hand stilled momentarily. "Has he now? And what views are those?" "That it doesn't exist. Or if it does, it inevitably leads to betrayal." Clara sighed, recalling their first conversation on Lady Merryweather's terrace. "He was engaged once, you know. She eloped with his cousin the night before the wedding." "Ah," Martha nodded sagely. "That explains much. A wounded heart often builds walls." "These aren't mere walls, Martha. They're fortifications." "Even the strongest fortress has a gate, miss," Martha said, securing the last hairpin. "There, you look lovely." The blue was definitely the right choice. As their carriage approached Zephyrcrest House later that afternoon, Clara found her nerves increasing. The Duke's London residence was a magnificent Georgian mansion set back from the street, its Portland stone facade gleaming in the spring sunshine. Perfectly proportioned windows reflected the blue sky, while twin stone lions guarded the entrance with regal indifference. "My goodness," Aunt Agatha breathed as they were admitted to a marble-floored entrance hall adorned with classical sculptures and family portraits. "Such elegance! And to think, Clara, that you might one day preside over such splendor." "Aunt, please," Clara whispered urgently. "The Duke has made no declarations." "Not in words, perhaps," her aunt replied with unusual perceptiveness. "But actions speak volumes, my dear. A man doesn't arrange a garden party overnight for a woman he views with mere friendly interest." Before Clara could respond, a footman announced them, and Quentin himself appeared at the far end of the hall. He wore no coat, merely a waistcoat of dark blue over a white shirt, with his cravat loosened slightly, a degree of informality that suggested comfort rather than ceremony. "Miss Brennington, Mrs. Brennington," he greeted them, crossing the hall with long strides. "Welcome to Zephyrcrest House." Clara curtsied, suddenly shy in the face of his direct gaze. "Your Grace. Thank you for including us in your gathering. I believe you'll find the guest list quite select," he said, offering his arm to lead them toward the rear of the house. "In fact, you are the entirety of it." Aunt Agatha's eyes widened. "The only guests? But surely that's not proper?" Quentin finished for her. "I've taken the liberty of inviting Lady Hammett, my aunt, to join us as an additional chaperone. She's waiting in the garden." This seemed to mollify Aunt Agatha, who allowed herself to be led through a series of handsome rooms to a set of French doors opening onto a sunlit terrace. Beyond stretched gardens of such beauty that Clara caught her breath. Formal parterres gave way to more naturalistic plantings, with winding paths disappearing among flowering shrubs and ancient trees. "It's magnificent," she said, genuine admiration in her voice. "Did you design this yourself?" "Much of it," Quentin acknowledged, pleased by her perception. "During my retreat from society, I found solace in reshaping the landscape. Nature asks no questions and makes no judgments." "Unlike society," Clara observed. "Precisely." His gaze held hers for a moment longer than strictly proper before he turned to greet an elegant older woman who approached from a nearby rose arbor. "Ah, here is my aunt now. Lady Hammett, may I present Mrs. Brennington and her niece, Miss Clara Brennington." Lady Hammett, a handsome woman in her 60s with Quentin's same direct gaze, assessed them both with undisguised curiosity. Charmed, I'm sure. Nephew, you failed to mention your guests were so young and lovely. Mrs. Brennington, shall we take a turn about the Italian garden while the young people explore the rose collection? My nephew is quite proud of his rare varieties. It was so neatly done that Clara hardly had time to register the orchestrated separation before she found herself alone with Quentin, walking between beds of roses in full bloom. Your aunt is very efficient, she observed once they were out of earshot. Terrifyingly so, Quentin agreed with a small smile. She's been trying to draw me back into society for years. I believe she's decided you're the instrument of my redemption. Am I? Clara asked softly. He stopped walking, turning to face her directly. Clara, there's something I must tell you. Her heart quickened at the serious note in his voice. Yes? Last night, when you asked what we were doing, what all this signified, I gave an incomplete answer. I remember, she said, her throat suddenly dry. The truth is, I find myself in an unexpected position, he continued. For 3 years, I have lived as though encased in ice, as you so aptly put it when we first met. I convinced myself that what happened with Eliza, my former fiancée, was proof that love is a dangerous illusion. And now? Clara asked, hardly daring to breathe. Now I find myself wondering if perhaps I was wrong, he said quietly. Not about Eliza, what she felt for me was clearly not love, but about the possibility of genuine connection. Of trust. He hesitated, of affection that deepens rather than diminishes with time. Clara felt as though her heart might burst from her chest. Quentin, are you saying, I'm saying that I cannot offer you love, he interrupted, his expression grave. I will never love again, that part of me is permanently altered. But I can offer respect, honesty, partnership. A marriage unlike those you've observed and rightfully rejected. Marriage? Clara repeated, stunned by the sudden turn of the conversation. I realize you've stated your opposition to matrimony, he continued, his words coming more rapidly now. But I believe your objections are to the unequal nature of most unions, not to the institution itself. With me, you would maintain your independence. Your opinions would not only be tolerated but valued. Your intellect would be respected, your spirit encouraged rather than suppressed. Clara stared at him, unable to formulate a coherent response. This was nothing like the passionate declaration of love she had secretly, despite her better judgment, begun to hope for. You're offering me a business arrangement, she finally managed. Quentin frowned. No. I'm offering you a partnership based on mutual respect and shared interests. Something far more durable than the fleeting emotion called love. I see. Clara took a step back, suddenly needing physical distance between them. And what of children? Would they be part of this rational arrangement? Of course, he said, as though this were obvious. The dukedom requires heirs, and I believe we would both find fulfillment in parenthood. Clara felt as though she had been doused in cold water. So I would be, as they say, a broodmare after all. Quentin looked genuinely shocked. Clara, no. That's not at all what isn't it, she interrupted, anger flaring unexpectedly. You speak of partnership and respect, yet you determined that love is impossible. That what you felt for Eliza was genuine, but because she betrayed you, no true love can exist. Have you considered that perhaps what you felt wasn't love at all, but infatuation? That real love might be something entirely different. His expression hardened. I know what I felt. Do you? Or did you love the idea of her, the perfect, biddable bride who would fulfill social expectations without challenging you as a person? You know nothing of my relationship with Eliza, he said coldly. I know that true love, the kind described in the novels you so readily dismiss, is not so easily destroyed," Clara replied, her own voice growing heated. "It doesn't shatter at the first betrayal. It grows, it learns, it forgives." "Like Mr. Darcy's convenient transformation?" he asked sardonically. "Yes. Exactly like that," Clara exclaimed. He loved Elizabeth enough to examine his own flaws, to grow beyond his pride. That's what real love does, it makes us better versions of ourselves. They stood facing each other among the roses, both breathing heavily as though they had been running. Quentin was the first to break the tense silence. "I cannot give you what I do not possess," he said quietly. "My capacity for that kind of love died 3 years ago." Clara felt tears threatening and blinked them back fiercely. "Then I cannot accept what you offer, no matter how rational or respectful the arrangement might be." "Why?" he demanded. "Because you insist on a sentiment neither of us has ever witnessed in reality." "Because I've realized something important," Clara said, her voice steadying. "I may have rejected marriage based on what I've observed, but deep down, I've always believed that a true partnership, one based on genuine affection as well as respect, might be possible. I would rather remain unmarried than settle for less." Quentin's expression was unreadable. "So you refuse me?" "I refuse the terms," she corrected gently. "Not the man." Before he could respond, the sound of approaching voices alerted them to the return of their chaperones. Clara quickly composed her features, though she felt as though a chasm had opened between her and the Duke. The remainder of the garden party passed in a blur of polite conversation and carefully maintained appearances. Lady Hammett proved to be surprisingly engaging, regaling them with tales of her travels in Italy. Aunt Agatha was unusually subdued, perhaps sensing the tension between Clara and the Duke despite their outward civility. When it came time to depart, Quentin escorted them to their carriage with perfect courtesy. "Miss Brennington," he said formally as he handed her in, "thank you for your candor today. You've given me much to consider." "As have you, Your Grace," she replied, unable to meet his eyes. As the carriage pulled away, Clara finally allowed the tears she had been suppressing to fall. Aunt Agatha, displaying unexpected sensitivity, simply patted her hand and refrained from questions. It was only later, alone in her bedchamber, that Clara fully confronted the painful truth. Despite all her declarations of independence, despite her rejection of marriage as an institution, she had fallen in love with Quentin Zephyrcrest. And in doing so, she had guaranteed her own heartbreak. The Duke of Zephyrcrest did not call at the Brennington residence the following day. Nor did he appear at Lady Harrington's card party that evening, where Clara sat stiffly through 3 rounds of whist while straining to hear every new arrival announced. By the 3rd day of silence, even Aunt Agatha had stopped hinting about possible messages or invitations. Instead, she regarded Clara with a mixture of concern and resignation, as though preparing herself for another season of introducing her niece to eligible gentlemen. "Perhaps we might accept Lady Northton's invitation to her country estate," she suggested over breakfast. "A change of scenery might be beneficial." Clara, who had been pushing eggs around her plate without eating, nodded listlessly. "As you wish, Aunt." "Clara," Aunt Agatha set down her teacup with uncharacteristic firmness. "I have not pressed you about what transpired between you and the Duke during your private conversation in the garden. Your red-rimmed eyes upon our return told me all I needed to know." Clara looked up, startled by her aunt's perceptiveness. "However," Aunt Agatha continued, "I cannot help but observe that you appear to be genuinely grieving. This suggests that, despite your frequently stated objections to matrimony, you had developed expectations regarding the Duke." "I had not," Clara said automatically, then sighed. "Or rather, I had not allowed myself to acknowledge that I had." "I see." Aunt Agatha considered this. And these expectations, were they of a romantic nature? Clara felt her cheeks warm. "Aunt, please." "I am not asking for improper details," her aunt said impatiently. "I merely wish to understand whether you have developed a genuine attachment to the Duke, or if you are simply disappointed that an advantageous match has failed to materialize." The question was surprisingly insightful coming from a woman who had spent years urging Clara to secure precisely such an advantageous match. The latter would be easier to bear, Clara admitted quietly. "But I fear it is the former." Aunt Agatha's expression softened. "Oh, my dear. Despite my many lectures on the practical aspects of matrimony, I had always hoped you might experience genuine affection within a suitable alliance. The Duke seemed ideal, his rank, his fortune, and his evident interest in you as a person rather than merely as a potential duchess." "He proposed," Clara said suddenly, the words tumbling out before she could reconsider. "But not out of love. He offered partnership, respect, independence, everything I've said I wanted in a hypothetical marriage. But he explicitly stated he would never love again." "Ah." Aunt Agatha sat back, comprehension dawning. "And you refused him?" "I refused the terms," Clara corrected, echoing her words to Quentin. "Not the man." "Because you love him," her aunt said simply. Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. "Well," Aunt Agatha said after a moment, reaching for the teapot with newfound determination. "This presents a conundrum indeed. But perhaps not an insurmountable one. Aunt, the Duke believes himself incapable of love because of his prior disappointment," Aunt Agatha said, pouring fresh tea into Clara's cup. "Yet his actions toward you, his seeking you out at every gathering, his evident pleasure in your company, his hasty arrangement of a private garden party, these suggest feelings that run deeper than mere respect or intellectual compatibility." "That means nothing," Clara protested. "Men often desire what they cannot have. Once I accepted his proposal, the chase would be over, and he would revert to cool politeness." "Perhaps," Aunt Agatha allowed. "Or perhaps he simply needs time to recognize what is already evident to observers, that his heart has already betrayed his declaration that he will never love again." Clara was prevented from responding by the arrival of the Morning Post. Among the usual invitations and correspondence was a letter addressed in a bold, masculine hand that she immediately recognized. "It's from him," she said, her fingers trembling slightly as she broke the seal. "Shall I give you privacy?" Aunt Agatha asked, already rising from her chair. Clara shook her head. "Stay. Please." Unfolding the single sheet, she read aloud, "Miss Brennington, I write to apologize for the abrupt nature of our conversation in the garden. My proposal was poorly expressed and, upon reflection, poorly conceived. You were correct in your assessment. What I offered was indeed a transaction disguised as partnership. In my determination to protect myself from further emotional harm, I failed to consider that such an arrangement would inevitably harm you. Your words regarding the nature of true love have remained with me. I find myself questioning convictions I had believed immutable. While I cannot promise transformation as dramatic as Mr. Darcy's, I ask only for the opportunity to continue our acquaintance without the pressure of matrimonial expectations. My cousin Richard has arranged a small musical evening at his home tomorrow. If you and your aunt would care to attend, it would give me great pleasure to escort you both. With sincere regard, Quentin Zephyrcrest. Clara looked up from the letter to find her aunt watching her with keen interest. "Well?" Aunt Agatha prompted. "Shall we accept?" "I'm not certain," Clara admitted. "He speaks of continuing our acquaintance, but to what end? If his views on love remain unchanged, we will simply find ourselves at the same impasse eventually. Or, Aunt Agatha suggested, through continued association, those views might evolve. People change, Clara. Even dukes who believe their hearts are permanently encased in ice. Clara reread the letter, focusing on the lines about questioning convictions he had believed immutable. It was not a declaration of love, not even close, but it was an admission of uncertainty where before there had been only rigid certainty. I suppose, she said slowly, there would be no harm in attending a small musical evening. Aunt Agatha smiled. None whatsoever. And Clara? Yes? Perhaps the blue muslin again. It does bring out your eyes so beautifully. Lord Richard Hammond's small musical evening proved to be considerably larger than implied, with at least 50 of London's most fashionable citizens in attendance. Clara, wearing the blue muslin as suggested, found herself uncharacteristically nervous as their carriage approached the Hammond residence. Remember, Aunt Agatha instructed as they awaited admission, the Duke has requested a continuation of acquaintance without pressure. You must be pleasant but not eager, interested but not invested. I'm aware of the social choreography required, Clara said dryly. Though I've never been particularly skilled at it. On the contrary, her aunt replied, surprising her, your natural directness has apparently captured the attention of the most elusive bachelor in London. Perhaps authenticity has more power than we give it credit for. Before Clara could respond to this unexpected philosophical observation, they were being announced and ushered into a drawing-room already crowded with guests. Her eyes immediately sought Quentin, but he was nowhere to be seen. Instead, it was Lord Richard who approached them, his resemblance to his cousin evident in his height and bearing, though his expression was far more genial. Mrs. Brennington, Miss Brennington, welcome. My cousin has spoken of little else but your expected arrival this evening. Clara felt a flush rise to her cheeks. You're too kind, my lord. Not at all, Richard assured her. Quentin has been detained with some business matter but asked me to convey his sincere apologies and his promise to join us shortly. In the meantime, may I introduce you to my wife, Lady Hammond? The next half-hour passed in a blur of introductions and polite conversation. Clara found Lady Hammond, a vivacious brunette some years younger than her husband, to be refreshingly forthright. So you're the woman who's finally drawn my husband's intimidating cousin back into society, she said when they had a moment relatively alone. I must thank you for performing what the rest of us considered a miracle. I've done nothing miraculous, Clara protested. The Duke and I simply share certain interests. Lady Hammond's eyes twinkled. Indeed? Richard says Quentin has developed a sudden passion for poetry, architecture, and botanical illustration, all subjects I've never before heard him express interest in, but which, coincidentally, I understand are particular favorites of yours. Clara wasn't sure how to respond to this gentle teasing, but was saved from the necessity by a subtle shift in the room's atmosphere. Looking up, she saw Quentin standing in the doorway, his tall figure commanding attention without effort. Their eyes met across the crowded room, and for a moment, it was as though no one else existed. Then he was moving toward her with purpose, navigating the crowd with minimal acknowledgement of those who tried to engage him. Miss Brennington, he said when he reached her, bowing formally. Thank you for accepting the invitation. I apologize for not being present to greet you upon arrival. Lord Richard has been a most attentive host in your absence, Clara assured him, acutely aware of Lady Hammond's interested observation of their exchange. I'm sure he has, Quentin said dryly. My cousin delights in social situations I have historically avoided. Until recently, Lady Hammond observed with a smile before tactfully excusing herself to attend to other guests. Left relatively alone, Clara and Quentin regarded each other with a mixture of caution and hope. He looked tired, she thought, noting the faint shadows beneath his eyes. Have you been unwell? She asked before she could stop herself. His expression softened at her concern. Merely preoccupied. Your words at the garden party have given me much to consider. As have yours, she acknowledged. I fear I was unduly harsh in my response to your proposal. No, he shook his head. You were honest, as you always are. It is one of the qualities I most admire in you. Before she could respond, a footman approached to announce that the musical portion of the evening was about to begin. Quentin offered his arm. Shall we? They joined the other guests, moving into an adjoining room where chairs had been arranged before a pianoforte. As Quentin guided her to seats near the front, Clara was acutely conscious of the warmth of his arm beneath her gloved hand and the curious glances directed their way. The first performer was a young lady whose technically perfect but emotionally vacant rendering of a Mozart sonata left Clara struggling to maintain an appearance of interest. Quentin, seated beside her, leaned close enough that only she could hear his murmured comment, "I believe I've heard more spirited performances from music boxes." Clara bit her lip to suppress a laugh, recalling similar private observations they had shared at previous social functions. This easy companionship, this sharing of unspoken thoughts, was it not its own form of intimacy? The next performer was more engaging, a baritone whose interpretation of Handel brought genuine emotion to the room. As the music swelled, Clara felt Quentin's hand move to cover hers where it rested on the arm of her chair. The gesture was hidden from general view by the proximity of their seats, but its significance was unmistakable. She did not pull away. When the performance concluded and refreshments were served, they found themselves momentarily separated as Aunt Agatha drew Clara into conversation with an elderly countess while Quentin was detained by his cousin. It was not until much later in the evening that they had another opportunity to speak privately. "Would you care to see the conservatory?" Quentin asked as the crowd began to thin. "Richard has a collection of rare orchids that might interest you." Clara glanced at her aunt, who was deep in conversation with Lady Hammett and appeared unlikely to object to a brief absence. "I would enjoy that." The conservatory was a glass-enclosed extension at the rear of the house, lit by strategically placed lanterns that cast a gentle glow over exotic plants and comfortable seating areas. The air was warm and fragrant with the scent of blooming flowers. "It's beautiful," Clara said, genuinely impressed by the collection. "Lord Richard must be quite the horticulturist." "My cousin has many unexpected interests," Quentin agreed, leading her to a stone bench partially screened by a large fern. "Though I suspect the conservatory was designed primarily to please his wife, who finds English winters excessively dreary." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, listening to the muted sounds of the gathering continuing indoors. Finally, Quentin spoke. "Clara, there is something I must tell you." Her heart quickened at the serious note in his voice. "Yes?" "After our conversation in the garden, I found myself unable to sleep. Your words about the nature of true love, about its capacity to withstand betrayal, to grow and change, they haunted me." Clara held her breath, afraid to interrupt whatever revelation was coming. "For 3 years," he continued, "I have defined myself by what I lost. I convinced myself that the pain I experienced was proof of love's ultimate futility. But what if?" He hesitated. What if it was merely proof that what I felt for Eliza was not love at all, but something lesser? "Quentin," Clara said softly, understanding the magnitude of this admission for a man who had built his identity around emotional invulnerability. "I still cannot promise what you deserve," he said, his voice low and intense. "I cannot declare feelings I am only beginning to understand. But I know that when I'm with you, the world seems more vivid. That your absence these past days has been a kind of darkness. That the thought of you finding happiness with someone else is unbearable," she finished for him, echoing his own word from their conversation at Lady Pembroke's musical evening. "Yes." He took her hand, his grip almost painfully tight. "I don't know if this is love, Clara. I only know that it is unlike anything I've experienced before. And I find myself hoping, she prompted gently. Hoping that you might be willing to explore whatever this is between us, he said. Not as a formal engagement, but as a genuine courtship. To give us, time to discover if what we feel for each other might indeed be the kind of love you described. The kind that transforms rather than diminishes. Clara felt tears gathering and blinked them back. Are you certain? Once the ton believes you are officially courting me, there will be expectations. Gossip. Pressure. Let them gossip, he said with a hint of his usual authoritative manner. I care only for your expectations, Clara. Not society's. She studied him in the soft lantern light. This man who had declared himself incapable of love yet was now asking for the chance to prove himself wrong. The vulnerability beneath his controlled exterior moved her deeply. Yes, she said simply. Yes, he repeated, as though unable to believe his ears. Yes, I am willing to explore whatever this is between us, she clarified, a smile breaking through her solemnity. Though I warn you, my aunt will be insufferably pleased with herself. Quentin laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that transformed his austere features. As will my cousin. He's been telling me for weeks that I'm half in love with you already. And are you? Clara asked, bolder than she would have thought possible. Quentin's expression grew serious again. I believe I may be more than halfway there, he admitted. But I would prefer to be certain before declaring myself fully. You deserve nothing less than absolute conviction. Clara nodded, understanding the honesty in his caution. Then we shall proceed with open hearts and open eyes. He raised her hand to his lips, the gesture both courtly and intimate. Thank you for your patience, Clara. For seeing possibility where I saw only endings. As they rejoined the party shortly thereafter, Clara noted the satisfied exchanges of glances between Lord Richard, Lady Hammett, and her aunt. Clearly, their brief absence and their changed demeanor upon return had not gone unobserved. I trust the orchid collection was illuminating, Lord Richard remarked to Quentin with barely disguised amusement. Exceedingly, Quentin replied, his tone dry but his eyes warm as they rested on Clara. In fact, I believe I've developed a newfound appreciation for cultivation. How fascinating, Lady Hammett commented innocently. One never knows what unexpected growths might emerge when the conditions are right. Clara caught Quentin's eye and had to suppress a smile at the double meaning. Perhaps their observers were not entirely wrong in their assumptions. Something was indeed growing between her and the Duke, something that might, with proper care and patience, bloom into exactly the kind of love she had always secretly hoped might exist. Over the following weeks, London society watched in fascinated speculation as the Duke of Zephyrcrest conducted what appeared to be an official courtship of Miss Clara Brennington. They were seen riding together in Hyde Park, properly chaperoned, of course, by either Aunt Agatha or Lady Hammett. They attended the theatre, the opera, and select social functions as a recognizable pair. They were observed in deep conversation at balls, seemingly oblivious to the curious glances directed their way. Most telling of all, the Duke, previously known for his brevity in social situations, was frequently seen laughing in Miss Brennington's company. Its transformation worthy of a novel, Lady Penworth declared to her circle one afternoon at Gunther's tea shop. The Frost Duke, completely thawed by a girl with modest fortune and forthright manners. I heard he's already proposed and been accepted, countered Lady Eldridge, always eager to be first with news. The announcement is merely delayed until her trousseau can be properly assembled. Neither lady noticed the subject of their gossip seated in a discreet corner of the establishment, accompanied by her aunt and the Duke himself. Clara, however, had heard every word and was struggling to maintain her composure. Your ears are turning pink, Quentin observed quietly. "What has caught your attention?" "Nothing of consequence," Clara murmured, though her lips twitched. "Merely some speculation regarding the state of your temperature." His eyebrow rose in question. "Apparently you've been completely thawed," she elaborated in a whisper. "And we're secretly engaged, awaiting only the completion of my trousseau to make the announcement." To her surprise, Quentin didn't appear amused by this gossip. Instead, his expression grew thoughtful. "Would that be so implausible?" he asked, his voice low enough that even Aunt Agatha, engaged in selecting pastries, couldn't hear. Clara's heart skipped. "Which part? The thawing or the engagement?" "Both." His eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "These past weeks have been illuminating." Before Clara could respond, Aunt Agatha rejoined them, effectively ending the private exchange. But Quentin's question lingered in Clara's mind throughout the remainder of their outing and into the evening. Would an engagement be so implausible? They had grown undeniably closer during their courtship. Quentin had revealed sides of himself she suspected few others had seen: his dry humor, his unexpected sentimentality regarding certain memories, his genuine interest in others beneath his reserved exterior. In turn, she had shared her hopes, her fears, her dreams of a life that balanced independence with companionship. Yet neither had spoken the word love aloud. The following afternoon, Clara was alone in the drawing room when a delivery arrived, a book-sized package wrapped in brown paper and sealed with the Zephyrcrest crest. Opening it curiously, she found a handsomely bound volume of Pride and Prejudice, its leather cover tooled with delicate gold filigree. A note fell from between the pages: "Clara, I have reread this novel twice since our debate in Lady Meriwether's library. I find my opinion of Mr. Darcy's transformation significantly altered upon further consideration. Perhaps you might join me tomorrow afternoon at Zephyrcrest House to discuss this and other matters of importance. My aunt will be present to ensure propriety, though I warn you she is even more efficient than your own estimable relation in finding reasons to leave us in relative privacy. With deepest regard." Quentin. Clara pressed the note to her chest, her heart racing. There was something in the phrasing, "matters of importance," that suggested this was no ordinary invitation. The Duke was a man who chose his words with precision. "A gift from His Grace?" Aunt Agatha inquired, entering the room with impeccable timing. "A book," Clara confirmed, showing her the volume but tucking the note discreetly into her pocket. "And an invitation to discuss it tomorrow afternoon at Zephyrcrest House." Aunt Agatha's eyes lit with undisguised anticipation. "Indeed?" How educational these literary discussions seemed to be. She paused, then added with uncharacteristic gentleness, "You care for him deeply, don't you, my dear?" Clara hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I do, Aunt. More than I thought possible." "And does he return your feelings?" "I believe," Clara said carefully, "that he is learning to. Whether what he feels is love as I understand it, as I feel it, I cannot be certain." "Sometimes," Aunt Agatha said, settling into her favorite chair, "men require time to recognize their own hearts. Your uncle, may he rest in peace, proposed to me 3 times before he used the word love. Yet I never doubted his attachment." Clara looked at her aunt in surprise. "I had no idea. You've always spoken of your marriage in such practical terms." "Because it was practical," Aunt Agatha replied with a small smile. "But it was also, in its own way, a love match. Not the swooning, dramatic sort one reads about in novels, but a steady affection that deepened with time and shared experience." This glimpse into her aunt's private history gave Clara much to consider as she prepared for her visit to Zephyrcrest House the following day. Perhaps there were many forms of love, each valid in its own way. Perhaps what she and Quentin were building together, This foundation of mutual respect, genuine affection, and growing trust was its own kind of love story. Zephyrcrest House seemed somehow different when Clara arrived the next afternoon, lighter, more welcoming than during her previous visit. Fresh flowers adorned the entrance hall, their fragrance replacing the austere scent of beeswax polish that had dominated before. Lady Hammett, rather than Quentin's aunt, greeted her and Aunt Agatha. Lady Zephyrcrest sent her regrets, she explained with a barely concealed smile. An urgent matter required her attention in Kent. She asked me to stand in as chaperone, though I warn you I'm dreadfully forgetful and may wander off at any moment. Aunt Agatha sniffed disapprovingly at this blatant signal of collusion, but Clara couldn't suppress a smile. It seemed the entire Zephyrcrest Hammett clan was determined to facilitate whatever was about to transpire. Quentin awaited them in a smaller, more intimate library than the grand one Clara had glimpsed during her previous visit. This room had the lived-in feeling of personal use, books with markers placed between pages, a half-finished chess game on a side table, comfortable chairs showing the impression of regular occupation. Miss Brennington, Mrs. Brennington, he greeted them formally, though his eyes, meeting Clara's, conveyed a warmth that belied his reserved manner. Thank you for accepting my invitation. We are always delighted to further Clara's literary education, Aunt Agatha replied with admirable gravity, though the twinkle in her eye suggested she was well aware of the pretense. Excellent, Lady Hammett interjected before anyone else could speak. Mrs. Brennington, I've just recalled that the Duchess's porcelain collection is on display in the East Drawing Room. As an acknowledged connoisseur of fine ceramics, you simply must see it. Aunt Agatha, who had never expressed the slightest interest in porcelain, nevertheless allowed herself to be led away with remarkable alacrity, leaving Clara and Quentin alone in the library. Your family is not particularly subtle, Clara observed once they had departed. Nor is your aunt, Quentin countered, the hint of a smile softening his features. I believe they formed an alliance. A terrifying thought. Clara moved toward one of the bookshelves, running her fingers along the spines of well-worn volumes. This room suits you better than the formal library. It was my father's private retreat, Quentin said, watching her exploration with evident pleasure. The only room in the house where decorum could be temporarily set aside. After his death, I found myself spending more time here than anywhere else. Thank you for sharing it with me, Clara said softly, understanding the significance of his allowing her into this personal space. I want to share everything with you, he said simply. Clara turned to face him fully, her heart quickening at the directness of his gaze. Everything? Clara, he began, then stopped, seeming to gather his thoughts. When we first met, I told you I would never love again. That my heart was permanently altered by betrayal. I remember, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was wrong, he continued, moving closer. Not about being altered, that was true enough. But I mistook alteration for destruction. I believed that because I could never again feel what I felt for Eliza, I could never love at all. And now? Clara hardly dared breathe. Now I understand that what I felt then was a poor imitation of love, a projection of my own expectations onto someone who never truly existed outside my imagination. He took her hands in his. What I feel for you is entirely different. It's grounded in reality, in your intelligence, your courage, your maddening honesty that never allows me to hide behind convention or title. Clara felt tears gathering but made no attempt to blink them away. Quentin. I love you, Clara Brennington, he said, his voice rough with emotion. Not as a character in a novel loves, perhaps, with grand gestures and poetic declarations. But as a man loves a woman who has awakened him to possibilities he had thought forever beyond reach. A tear slipped down Clara's cheek. I never thought to hear you say those words. Nor did I expect to speak them, he admitted with a rueful smile. Yet here we are. Here we are, she echoed, her own smile breaking through her tears. There's one question I must ask before proceeding, Quentin said, his expression growing serious again. When we spoke in the garden that day, you rejected what I offered, a marriage of partnership without love. Now that I offer both partnership and love, I must know, have your views on matrimony itself changed? Clara considered the question carefully, wanting her answer to reflect her true feelings rather than the emotion of the moment. My objection was never to marriage itself, she said finally. It was to the unequal nature of most unions, where women surrender their identity and independence for security. And if equality were assured, he pressed. If your independence were respected, your identity preserved. Then I would embrace such a union wholeheartedly, she said, her voice steadying with conviction. Especially with a man I have come to love more deeply than I ever thought possible. The joy that transformed Quentin's features at her words was answer enough, but he spoke nonetheless. Then, Clara Brennington, would you do me the great honor of becoming my wife? Not as the Duchess of Zephyrcrest, though that title comes with the bargain, but as my partner, my equal, my love. Yes, she said simply. With all my heart, yes. He drew her into his arms then, his kiss conveying what words could not, the depth of his feeling, the promise of a future neither of them had believed possible when they first met on Lady Merryweather's terrace. When they finally separated, both a little breathless, Clara couldn't resist one final observation. Your eyes betrayed you from the beginning, you know. Did they? Quentin asked, surprised. That first night at the Countess of Merryweather's ball, when you declared yourself incapable of warmth or connection, your eyes told a different story. There was such loneliness there, such yearning for something you believed forever lost. And now? He asked softly. Clara studied the eyes that had first captured her attention across a crowded ballroom, no longer guarded or cold, but warm with unmistakable affection. Now they speak only of love, she said. A love I promised to cherish for all our days. Their second kiss was interrupted by a poorly timed entrance from Lady Hammett and Aunt Agatha, whose expressions of exaggerated surprise at finding the couple in an embrace fooled no one. I see congratulations are in order, Lady Hammett observed with a broad smile. Indeed they are, Quentin confirmed, keeping Clara's hand firmly in his. Miss Brennington has agreed to become my wife. Aunt Agatha's composure finally broke as she rushed forward to embrace Clara. My dearest girl. I am so very happy for you, or for both of you. As the afternoon dissolved into excited discussion of announcements and wedding plans, Clara found herself watching Quentin with wonder. The transformation was complete, not just in him, but in her as well. She had entered the season determined to maintain her independence at all costs, convinced that marriage could only diminish her sense of self. Instead, she had discovered that the right partnership could expand rather than contract one's possibilities. And Quentin, who had declared with such certainty that he would never love again, now looked at her with eyes that betrayed his heart's true capacity, not for the shallow infatuation he had mistaken for love in his youth, but for the deeper, more enduring connection they had forged together. It was, Clara reflected with satisfaction, a transformation worthy of the finest novel, and it was only the beginning of their story.